Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. If you have your own song you'd like to submit for special selection, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's comes at us from Eliza. Hey, Bryan, making another request for Refused. This time the song Poetry Written in Gasoline. This is from their EP, The New Noise Theology, which was released shortly after The Shape of Punk to Come and was their final release at the time. The Shape of Noise to Come is the album that we checked out last time from them. We listened to one of the songs from it. I thought it was fascinating to hear so many modern ideas coming out of this album from 98, I think it was. And I went and looked that up because it said it was, Eliza said this was their last release at the time, and I wanted to know what that meant, and yeah, that was it for years. It was actually 17 years later when they reunited and started making music again. There's been 3 or 4 albums out since 2015 when they reunited. So it's interesting. This is the last EP, last release that they had of their original run before they took almost a 2-decade hiatus. So, alright, let's dive into this. We've got Poetry Written in Gasoline. So funky with that rhythm and the guitars against the straight eighth notes and the cymbals. Lots of bass in here as well. Interesting sound effects being put on the bass. A lot of stuff just going on all at one time. Really difficult to keep track of everything, especially since there's so little that seems to go along with each other. Such a gnarly harsh. Very cool. Really pushing against that 4/4. I didn't want to say it earlier, but the effects on the bass now with this as well, I'm getting a lot of that production experimentation vibes that I got from early prog rock. Interesting. The snare accent is shifting around. Another moment of bringing it all down, simplifying. The production on the drums have been piquing my interest this whole time, and this section with them isolated is, I don't know what's going on. That was a clean snare roll. What are we going to dotted quarters there at the ends? Yeah, this is interesting. It's like early hardcore mixed with, or no, hardcore through the lens of prog rock, or maybe the inverse of that, prog rock through the lens of hardcore, hardcore punk, of course. It's, I don't know if there's anything compositionally in here that make me think of prog rock, but the production really makes me think of, 80s prog rock bands. And it's got that same experimentality to production ideas and sounds, but it also has some experimentality to placement of instruments. It's feels like it comes from a time before we had kind of standardized where some of these ideas fit in larger productions. And it was 98, I think, is what I said for this. So I don't know that we had finally hit a point of standardization of instrument placement in rock adjacent genres, but I think we were definitely at a point where this was not something that would have been normal. They really push the ideas that they're going with, and I think it's interesting to hear that. Like I said, it's the spirit of prog rock. And actually, I said I can't think of any compositional aspects, but punk is not really a genre to me that typically dials it down, and they did that twice. In fact, the second time they did it is very much in a prog style of manner, taking a note from our previous energetic section, holding it out, letting it naturally fade over several bars while bringing in just the drums and maybe I think in this case it was just the drums, but in prog rock we sometimes hear the drums and a single instrument from the next section underneath it. So we kind of crossfade into this next idea. We bring it down naturally like that. And that's exactly what happened here. So yeah, there's actually a few ideas in here that to me feel very prog rock, but the energy, the aesthetic of it is all hardcore punk. It's just a weird bonkers combination, but much like the last time we checked out Refused, I'll put the link here for anyone who wants to check that out. They're definitely forward-thinking, a forward-thinking band that was ahead of their time. They even named their song or they named their last album, the one before this, was The Sound of Punk to Come. And I don't think they were wrong with that. Like I said, just always generally forward thinking. So let's dig into some of the stuff that's going on here. There is a lot. I don't know how deep this analysis is going to run, but we'll see where I can take it. So to start, let's look at the verse, because I think the verse lays down a pretty nice archetype that a lot of the other sections are going to borrow from. We have 1 to 2 guitars playing noise. And for those new to the channel, I'm not saying noise derogatorily. It just really seems like they're creating more of a texture sound more than anything melodic or harmonic or chord based. They're really just trying to create some noisy textures. They're trying to make the song sound aggressive. In one of the guitar lines, it's literally just a single sound. I don't know if it's a chord or a note. I really can't tell past the fuzz on it. But I'm pretty sure it's a stationary sound, and it's just some up and down strumming on it, and creating rhythmic structures out of that. It might be a pocket of 5 strums, and then a pocket of 4 strums, and then back to the 5, and then like 2 or 7, or whatever. But creating these different rhythmic elements so that it can be a bit syncopated against that core beat that the drum is dropping. And we're just really getting the fuzz on a lot of that and a tone. It's not playing anything melodic. It's not harmonizing with the vocals. It's not doing anything else. It's really just putting that fuzziness in the foundation of the song. Occasionally we'll have a second guitar that does the same thing constantly, rather than doing the syncopated, sparse ideas. There's also 1 or 2 times when another guitar comes in with something more melodic, where we do have changing notes, but it's not something that would be strong enough that I would classify as a main melody, just something that moves more than sitting on a single note, which the other 2 guitars do very often. And so through this, we have our note bed, so to speak. This is the sound of the foundation of the song. On top of that, which is real interesting because that's not usually how songs are stacked, on top of that we get our bass, and our bass is playing melody lines more or less. They have an interesting effect on them that causes a fluctuation in, I think, the EQ. Sometimes they feel a bit more bass heavy, sometimes they feel a bit more treble heavy, and it sort of just kind of fluctuates between these two ideas. It also kind of feels like it's panning at times, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But it does have note changes to it, and at times it feels like it's just walking a bass line. At other times it feels like it's playing what should be the main melody if it weren't covered up with just the loudness of everything around it at times. Um, but it's interesting that the guitars are mostly textural and foundational. The bass is given the one moving idea that happens predominantly through the song. I did mention that occasionally we get a guitar with a moving line, but the bass gets it in every section. It's really interesting. But it has this really interesting EQ fluctuation on it as well, where none of the other instruments have that. It's one of those little bits of sonic experimentation I'm talking about when I say that I feel some prog rock inspiration in here sonically, production-wise. Um, then we have the drums. I honestly have no idea how to feel about them. They do, looking strictly at the music, they do what they do very well. A lot of the times they are holding down the core rhythm while also being a bit flashy. There's a lot of energy, a lot of attack coming from them. They're very loud and impactful. They sort of overshadow some of the other instruments, even in several cases where they just feel like they have more volume than anything else in the band. And like I said, musically, we're just getting a real solid rhythm from them with some embellishing ideas to sort of accent and dance around that core rhythmic structure. But what throws me off about the drums, and I mentioned this in the second section when we came down a little bit, there's something production wise about them that is odd. Modern production puts the drums center with the bass creating our rhythm section, and the rest of our instrumentation, which tends to be in the higher range, our vocals, our guitars, strings, whatever else the band wants to use. Saxophones seem to be pretty big in metal for some reason. They get pushed sort of center to the side, right? Vocals typically get center placed as well, and this is just a really great way to divide everything. The drums have more of a crack to them. The bass is lower end. The vocals are higher end. They sort of fill in all three areas centered, and then the guitars tend to be in the same in the same range as the vocals. So you separate them spatially, one guitar on either side. A lot of modern rock sound is produced like this, and it just works at divvying things up so that nobody can step on each other's toes. The bass is probably not getting up into the register of the vocalist. The bass also typically plays the same thing the bass kick is playing, so it centers those sounds. The guitars and the vocals can be in the same place pitch wise, so you separate them to be in their own head or in their own speaker. And it just really, anything that could clash or step on each other's toes is just separated. It puts everything in a nice place. Here, and granted, like I said, that is a modern rock production. It could be that that wasn't quite set up in 98 yet. A lot of bands making music in the last 10, 15 years are working within something close to that framework. But this band, is there anything centered? Everything to me feels center side. Or full side, which is actually really weird because this is where the drums come in. I mentioned the drums sound weird. I think the drums are hard panned left and right, but not center. It's so strange. And what I mean by left and right is that when the snare hits, because, okay, so here's another thing about drum production is that, especially, again, in modern productions, the different instruments, you know how they're arranged in sort of an arc in front of the drummer? They're also sort of placed that way in the speakers. There's two ways to go about it. Audience preference, which would place the snare on the right and the toms to the left of it, and drummer preference, which places the snare on the left and the drummers to, yeah, the opposite. Snare left, toms right. From the audience perspective, the snare's on the right and the toms are to the left. Either way, though, there is a movement of the drums. You go listen to a drum fill that goes from the snare down to the toms, and you'll probably hear it moving through your headphones. But a lot of it is still centered. You know, it kind of angles out to a little bit, so it's not just centered. It's a bit of an arc in front of you, but it still stays rather centered. And here there is nothing centered, but I hear everything. The snare, when I hear it hit, I hear it on both sides apart. Like there's two drum kits, one on either side of my head. And I hear it coming in that way. It is very disorienting to me. I don't know if it's because I'm very familiar with the centered drum technique. I don't know if it's because it feels like there's two drums and they're playing the exact same thing. I don't know, but the placement of the drums is very, very strange in here. Definitely something I would have to get adjusted to. On a first listen, it was very distracting. And any moment that I got a chance to listen to the drums alone, that was immediately what I went to, regardless of how interesting the drums were, regardless of how interesting something else might be. I'm listening to the drums, ignoring everything else, trying to figure out what is going on here. And I think that's it. They're just not centered at all. They are widened to the most effect so that it's replicated on both sides and not any in the center. And I can't say I enjoy it. How do we get there, though? How did we get onto the topic of the drums? Oh, yeah, because we talked about the guitars and what they were doing. Then the drums, we talked about what they were doing. I had to go on that little aside. You know, I lied to you guys when I said it was going to be quick. And then above all of this, we have the vocals. And I love the vocals here. They are sort of that emo style of harsh vocal where it almost sounds like a compressed pitched note. Like it is using the true vocal cords and putting compression on top of them. And I don't know if that's what it is, but that's what it sounds like to me. And I just really enjoy this style of vocalization. We checked something out like this last week when we looked at Cap and Jazz. Maybe it's because I grew up with this sound, listening to a lot of pop emo when I was a teenager. But this style of harshes, I just feel very at home in, even though they're still rather abrasive. And this style does kind of push it a little bit past what I'm used to with just the frequency of it. But sonically, I really don't mind it at all. And I think it works well for the energy of the track. And that's what I want to look at next. Is the vibe here. And it kind of changes, right? We do have a couple of more mellow sections. But overall, the song is just driving, energetic, pushing forward, and chaotic at all times. I had mentioned that in many of these sections, there's a lot of stuff going on that I feel don't always complement each other. The bass line in particular seems to always be in its own little realm. I mentioned it all. It's also one of the few, it is the only instrument that plays a melody-like idea consistently through the track. But that also means it feels out of place against all the other textural playing. And I'd even put the vocals in a textural area too. They don't really change notes too often. It's just about adding more fuzz, distortion, screaming white noise stuff to the mix. And for all of the fuzz from the guitars and from the vocals and a little bit of compression they have on the drums, this is a very clean mix. I can clearly hear everything. Really interesting. But yeah, the bass just consistently feels like it's doing something totally different than the rest of the band. We have a few instances of rhythmic ideas that aren't necessarily lining up with what the drum's doing, but not in like a cool polyrhythmic way, but just in a chaotic way. The drums are accenting these beats. Well, we're going to accent these. Why? Is it counter to it in any way? Does it support it, what the drums are doing? Not really, but it's different. So now we just have, as a listener, a flurry of accented sounds. Sometimes they're on the beat, sometimes they're off the beat, sometimes they're in between half beats. And it's kind of random at times once you hear the full pattern. Like if you hone into a specific instrument creating accents, you're like, oh, it's doing it every third half a beat. Okay, I get it now. But when you listen to it against the drums constant on the beats, and then maybe another instrument who's doing something like every 2.5 beats or something like that, it really starts to get to a complex area where rhythmically it's very involved and feels like it's jumbled up. There's a lot of mixed ideas going on here. And, like I said, all the guitars are kind of in the same vibe. The vocals are kind of all in the same vibe. They're all higher ranged, fuzzy textures that play around with rhythms mostly. They're not really touching on melodies and harmonies. So you have 3 to 4 instruments in most situations playing around with rhythm. And yeah, it can get a bit messy at times. But I think that's the point of it. I mean, that's the point of punk, right? And when you break down punk, it's about shouting messages as loudly as you can because you're upset and making music that's so loud and aggressive that people can't ignore it. That's what punk means to me, at least. It's not about being clean. It's not about intricately weaving ideas together. It's about being loud and getting your message across. And that's what Refused, this track specifically, Poetry Written in Gasoline, feels like. Even the title, I think, is fairly blunt. This is poetry written in gasoline. It's, to me, 15 years later, oh, more than that, 20 years later, yeah, geez, like 24 years later. It's been a long time since this album came out. Gasoline's sky high as far as prices, so this has a different meaning to me now because gasoline's not really a commodity you would waste to write poetry in. But, it's also highly destructive, right? It also has a very pungent smell to it. There's a lot of negative aspects about gasoline that you would just not associate with the beauty of poetry. This is very much a Beauty and the Beast kind of idea here that could be seen as utilizing the wrong medium for a specific goal. Like I said, just kind of very blunt. It is metaphorical, but it's also a very clear metaphor, at least to me. And, bluntness, right? That's what I get out of punk. And that's what this song really means to me. It is highly energetic in places, very chaotic in most of them, and just always driving forward with a sort of intensity and lack of caring if people understand or like the sounds that they're creating. They went experimental on this one, it feels like to me. And they said, you know what? If it doesn't work for people, that's fine. We're still going to make it. And that's just so punk, right? And that's what a lot of this feels like. However, there are a couple of moments when we bring it down, and we don't stay in there very long. But I already mentioned how these moments feel very prog rock to me, right? Where we hold the note out and bring the new idea underneath it and slowly fade this higher note out from the previous section until it's gone and all that's left is this new quieter moment. I don't know what to think of these. Maybe when we get into the lyrics, they might make sense. From my point of view, it's more chaos. Or I guess it's more unexpectedness. The second one was not so unexpected, but the first one came after 3 or 4 minutes of high intensity chaotic playing and just kind of died out for no reason, especially since we stuck around with it for 15, 20 seconds before bringing the snare back in and doing a nice roll into the next chaotic section. It was an intermission that really didn't stick around for long. Normally I would talk about this as contrast, especially with all the driving intensity of this song. It's a moment for the listener to take a moment, figure out what they've been listening to, catch their breath, calm their heart rate down. Not necessarily things punk typically wants to do. I think there's a reason that historically, punk has kept high energy throughout their entire songs. They pretty much run it at 10 constantly, and they keep their song lengths down, right? Your moment to reflect on what you've heard and to catch your breath is between the tracks. And here they put it in the middle of a track. And it removes the immediacy of the energy for, like I said, not even very long. We were in it and gone back into the energy again in just a few moments. I don't quite understand what the purpose of it was. It feels sort of like a red herring, a psych out. You thought we were going to do something nice for a little bit, something maybe a more melodic, and we didn't, right? Psych! Going back to the 90s, 2000s idea. The second time around just kind of feels spiteful because of that, because I do think it was even shorter than the first time, but it was also more expected. They're like, oh, okay, we're really calming down this time. We're really going to take it easier. And then again, nothing. We go right back into it. And I don't know, like I said, I don't quite understand its purpose musically. Maybe there's a purpose to it thematically once we dig into the lyrics, but uh, normally, like I said, when we would explore an area like this in a song like this, it's for specific reasons to create contrast. And here, I don't get that gist because we don't stay with it long enough. It feels more like a quick inhale right before trying to play a long bit again, um, than any sort of downtime to create contrasting ideas. Because usually we create contrast to make our moments, to amplify our moments, right? So when we get back to the 10, it'll actually feel like a 10 instead of like normal, right? But we don't stay in this long enough to provide that contrast. We get right back into the 10 and it's like we never left. It is slowly becoming the new normal. It's slipping down into a 5. It's just what the song sounds like. We would need to stay in the calmer section a fair bit longer for that contrast to really hit. So I don't know, maybe it's just purely experimental. Let's see, is there anything else I want to talk about? Got the abrasiveness, vibe, vocals, guitars, weird drums. I think that's everything. Actually, weird, I think, could explain a lot of my feelings here when it comes to production and sound, just overall. The drums are kind of interesting, weird. The bass has an interesting tone to it, weird. The overall production, just placement of everything, is kind of weird. Those moments where we kind of calm the song down for a couple of bars is kind of weird. And I say weird with like the most amount of love I can. You guys know I love weird music. Especially anything that challenges my notion of what music should be or could be is definitely going to be good in my books. So I suppose we're going to get into some lyrics here and see what's going on. Scrap the extras, let's keep our eyes wide open. Cut out the spare parts, let's keep the eyes wide open. Keep our eyes wide open. Forget the idols, let's keep our eyes wide open. Reject the star, 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 star. Let's feed ourselves some, let's keep our eyes wide open. Destruction. Oh, so this, let's keep our eyes wide open, is repeated a lot. In the first 4 stanzas, actually, that's all of it. The first half of the song, it's an 8 stanza song. The first 4, though, at the end of every line, we utilize this. So if we just understand this to be an underlying mantra of the song, we divorce it from the rest of the stanzas. We get scrap the extras, cut out the spare parts, forget the idols, reject the star, let's feed ourselves some destruction. Convention blackmails creativity. This lack of challenge kills me. Scrap the extras, cut out the spare parts, forget the idol. All right. I kind of have a vague idea of what's going on here. But it seems to be, it says forget about our idols, reject our stars, right? Let's feed ourselves some destruction. To me, this reminds me of the rise of trash media. I don't remember if this was in the late 90s or not. To me, this was a 2000s thing. But, the rise of reality TV. We didn't need to hire script writers or actors. We would just film people and they would make drama. And it was insanely popular. It still kind of is insanely popular. I don't know how popular reality TV is compared to its huge, it seems like pop culture rise in maybe the late 90s, 2000s, like I said, is when I remember it. But just this idea that we need to stop feeding ourselves this trash, to scrap the extras and cut out the spare parts, this garbage we don't need. Forget about the celebrities, reject the stars, right? Even bringing this back to the idea of how this might stifle creativity. Convention. This was the convention of the time. Like I said, we don't need script writers, right? That's creativity right there. We're just going to let people be, right? We don't need real actors. We don't need the creativity that comes from acting and immersing yourself in a role. We just need these people being who they are, right? It says convention blackmails creativity, and this lack of challenge kills me. Almost like him trying to create his own art, assuming that he was making something visual, or maybe it was even some of this aspect bleeding into music. He says this lack of challenge kills me. And listening to this music, right, I can tell that this is a band that values challenge. This is not punk per se. It's punky for sure. It has a lot of punk chutzpah in it, but it's also very experimental in a lot of ways. It challenges what punk could be. Their last album did the same as well, pushed punk into the next era. And the lack of skill that any of this trash media rise, and I want to put that in quotations. That's a phrase that constantly gets pushed around with reality television and gossip media and stuff like that. Not my words. I don't view some of that very positively, but I don't think it's a bad medium wholesale. Anyways, though, the lack of challenge that goes into creating this art, so to speak, we are talking about television series and even film in some cases. And like I said, it could have bled over into music. I'm just not aware of any specific case of that. But to me, what the popular culture demanded required a lack of challenge, and it seems like the vocalist at least felt stifled enough that it was suffocating. This lack of challenge kills me. So he restates himself: scrap the extras, cut out the spare parts, forget the idols, reject the star. I think that's what the entire first half is talking about, is breaking out of the molds of the simplicity in mainstream media as a whole. And doing stuff that challenges you. Find your creativity. Don't follow convention. It'll stifle it. Don't follow those who are in the limelight, basically. Which I guess there's also a negative edge to that, because it also feels like they're saying don't chase after what's popular, which, yes, I agree with that. I think some of our best art, whether it is film, television, books, music, a lot of the really great stuff is not in the spotlight. You're going to find it on the fringe. It's those hidden gems no one talks about, that isn't, they're not promoted in the top 40 or, the front page of Netflix or whatever like that. New York Times bestsellers. There's definitely going to be something about mass appeal there. And when you're appealing to that many people that you want to be popular, you're going to make whatever that word is. When you meet halfway on something. Why can't I think of that word? Compromise. You're going to have to compromise on your vision to have mass appeal. So there's definitely an angle there. right, that I agree with, but it also kind of feels like it might be trashing on anything popular at the same time. And I kind of don't want to read it like that, but punk is also very counterculture. And I just don't know who these guys are on a personality level. So I don't know which way to read into that. So I'm just going to leave it at that, where it could have a positive and a negative connotation to the idea of just cutting out anything popular and chasing things that break convention. Well, I should say, and instead chase things that break convention. All right, we come up to the rhymes of revolution, poetry written in gasoline, the rhymes of revolution, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think this kind of leans right back into that idea. This is fashionable revolution, right? The rhymes of revolution. Revolution doesn't rhyme. It's not pretty, right? It's gritty. And here is dressing it up as a work of art. This is revolution through art. And of course, that's not how revolution works, but it is very popular. Poetry written in gasoline, once again, the idea of something that should be well done, poetry clashing with something that just doesn't work, wrong medium. Revolution shouldn't be done through poetry. Revolution is done through action, as historically shown. So yeah, I think this whole section right here is just talking about wrong medium for the message. Manipulate the obvious, cowards bought by traditionalist manners, scream at the herd that are heard the most without substance and with useless banners. I think this goes back to the trash media that we were talking about, where it wasn't art. It was presented like art, uh, but it wasn't artful. There wasn't any skill put into it, as was stated. Well, there wasn't any creativity. Well, he also says lack of challenge. So yeah, maybe no skill put into it. And of course, I want to clarify that I don't think that creating trash media requires no skill. I think it just requires different skills than people would typically associate, such as with reality TV. There still has to have a director with a vision, and they still kind of coach the people, and it's still semi scripted. And there's actually a lot of skill in making it look handheld, despite having a full recording camera and getting a full setup, but making it look like real life. Like it's not a skillless uh, task for a team to make reality TV. But I think right here is really digging at the heart of this argument is that it's without substance. And I think that's the heart of all it is drama for drama's sake, not drama to send a message like when we would watch a dramatic film. And says, your art is worth nothing. Like a city with no meaning, your creation holds no hope. Again, it is futile. It exists for its own existence. It has no substance to it. He says it's useless. I don't necessarily believe that. It has use in entertainment, whether you find it entertaining or not. People did find it very entertaining during its popularity. But yeah, I think that's what this is all coming around to. Like I've specifically sort of focused on um, reality television as a whole, but I think this is just sort of looking at all commercial arts um, on kind of both sides of the spectrum. But the underlying idea is that anything done in an artistic medium, again, film, music, books, uh, even nowadays that include video games. I think it's a very strong artistic outlet. Um, but doing it for the sole purpose of making money, soulless films, so to speak. Soulless music, corporate art, and I think that's what this is getting at. Is that we as artists need to continue to do what we do, stop chasing the stars, stop chasing the limelight, because that's not where the true art is made. And like I said, a little iffy on that idea, but that's the message I'm getting here. And says we need to forget our idols, reject the stars, and chase after creativity and challenge. Make art that means something. Make art that gives people hope. Do not make art worth nothing. And I dig that message. I do. I don't necessarily agree with every single supporting detail they put behind that thesis statement, but the idea that your art should be worth something, that it should mean something, yes, I fully support that idea. And how does this line up with the musical themes here? So it's punk, right? The whole point of punk is to be loud and get your message across, and that's what this is. Not to mention that punk is also just very counterculture. And this is very much saying, I reject our culture, vie for something that has meaning, has heart behind it. Don't chase corporate art. Don't hold that up as the medium that you most want to be like. And so it's counterculture, it's loud, it has a message. Punk is the perfect avenue to send this, especially since the idea is about challenging yourself and having creativity behind your ideas, and the song being a very forward looking version of punk. It all just really comes together in the whole package. All right, I'm going to cut it off here. This is where you guys come in. Those are my thoughts on Refused's track, Poetry Written in Gasoline. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this track, anything you enjoyed, anything you didn't enjoy, anything you'd like to add on to my thoughts or correct me on. Above the comment section, if you could, head into the description box. You'll find a link for Linktree in there, which takes you to this menu right here. Really cool place. You can join the Patreon and help control the future of the channel. You can follow me on Twitter, join the Discord community, pick up some merch. Just a bunch of stuff in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll look at another lyrical dissonance track and another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.